R6. And Lori, are you there?
I'm certainly here.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Yeah, that's fine. What I'm I'll continue on. What I'm hoping to do today is kind of give you a good background in the sense of just kind of touching on what is a situational analysis, how to conduct one, and then the relationship between doing a situational analysis and a broader process of community development, particularly planning, decision-making, and action processes. When they sent you a notice, Mary sent you the notice about today's presentation, they posed a question, and I kind of think it's a good one because it's one that oftentimes we get asked. You've been asked to help the community identify a solution to an issue that's been a source of conflict. So, how would you try to understand what led the community to the current situation? How do different sides of the conflict see or give meaning to the issue and think about possible solutions? And I think it's also important to think about, and a situational analysis can help us do that, figure out, is there support for any of the possible solutions that we might identify in our situational analysis? So I think that the programs or the kind of processes that we're going to be looking at today can help us do all of this. So what is a situational analysis? It really is a very systematic method for understanding a community as a whole social system. It is a way of, it's a systematic method for collecting, analyzing, and delivering information about different aspects of the community, from its current and past conditions, the way, the historical development of it, the distribution of power, culture, the context, how people think about who they are. It is, from my perspective, and let me just say this, kind of like to introduce, I work with communities throughout the state. Right now I'm working in 5 different counties or towns in Kentucky, helping them do strategic planning and community visioning processes. And so I work with them a lot. I've got a lot of on-the-ground experience and hands-on experience in guiding communities through a development process. And we always try to begin, we always incorporate a situational analysis into that process. So it's a key step in a larger development process. It helps us figure out where are we now and how did we get here. It does or can be the jumping off point for thinking about where do we want to be in the future and developing a vision for the future. And the situational analysis is really a key starting point in thinking about how to design a strategic or implementation plan to get to that future that we've talked about and agreed upon as members of the community. I know that I encounter communities a lot where the attitude is, why are we wasting time doing this? Why don't we just go ahead and do something? And I understand that kind of desire to kind of move forward and to see some of this process as being, we're just spinning wheels, wasting time. But the truth of the matter is that we really can't decide what to do or where to go if we don't understand how we got into our current situation. If we haven't spent some time thinking about what has worked for us as a community in the past and what hasn't and why hasn't it, we're going to end up trying to do something using the same methods and processes as we used in the past that maybe failed, and find ourselves going back into a kind of a cycle of effort and failure. So the situational analysis helps us begin to kind of think about, how did we get here? It also is important because I'm not sure, I think too often in communities, we come in, people like me, outsiders, although I try to avoid this, or there are persons in the community that are absolutely positive that they know what needs to be done. And by gosh, they're going to make everybody do it because they know they're right. But if we try and create change that way, we base our action strategies on something, without grounding them in an understanding of the situation from the perspective of those who live in it every day in the community, I think we're setting ourselves up for failure. And so I don't know, I think it was Mark Twain who said that what we think we know is not always so, and that to me is the kind of like the simple reasons why situational analysis is really important. I really want to encourage people, if you hear something that you say, oh yeah, I've just been in a place where they've done that, or the community I'm working in is doing that, or saying those sorts of things, please pop into the chat line or go ahead and unmute your phone and make some comments, because I would hope that this will be kind of interactive where we can kind of share experiences. So I guess I'm going to kind of pose to you, has anyone encountered a situation or been in a situation where people wanted to jump right into getting something done without a real clear understanding of what the current situation was and how they had gotten there?
This is Mary, and I would say that one of the things that amazes me very often is that not only do people not have a really good sense of what the landscape looks like that they're jumping into, but they also haven't really even defined the problem very effectively. And so they're so eager to do something. You know, it's almost like that ready, fire, aim kind of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And I mean, how many of us have been asked to attend a meeting that is supposed to be a problem-solving meeting, but when we ask people, well, what is the problem, we get 9 definitions of the problem, and there's 8 people in the room. Right? I mean, I've seen that so many times. So yeah, you're right. It's that kind of like, let's just jump into it. We have this real kind of cultural preference for action, and I think that kind of sometimes leads us into problems.
This is Heidi. I think I was just going to add one more thing, Lori. I think part of that is sometimes we get so much into the process but don't actually follow through on the implementation that communities get frustrated with that too. So I think what I've really liked about, I think, your approach is thinking through from the beginning to the end and making sure there is implementation, because so many people get lost in the process sometimes.
Yeah. And to me, part of it, what tends to encourage that to happen, is that we don't create small steps in the action plan. We make sweeping statements about this is going to happen, but we really haven't worked out the nitty-gritty details. So when I work with communities, organizations, and I'm helping them develop a strategic plan, we get down to, I encourage them to, in their plan, have as much detail about exactly what we need to do, what little steps we need to take in order to accomplish a particular strategy or action. That really helps. I see Michelle and Brian. So you have a town that has a comprehensive plan that dates back to the 1960s. Wow. I hope they've accomplished something out of it. Or have they done what a lot of communities do? They enshrine it in a glass case, and every day when people walk past it, they kind of bow down and they say, bless you, plan, bless you, plan. But that's about it. I seen that. Oh yes, we have a plan. I say, where is it? Oh yeah, it's over there on that bookshelf or in that glass case. So what I'm going to try and do is help us think about ways to do a situation analysis that leads us into actual implementation and application. Comments, anybody else? I think they've ignored it, and town leaders have taken their own directions. I think that often happens. Michelle and Brian said. So ways to use a situational analysis, the techniques I'm going to suggest to you, you can use them to actually define what the concerns are, to clarify what is going on in this community or in this place. What is the thing that brought us together? What is the nature of the problem? They are also effective in helping us separate facts from myths and predictions, the reality of the situation from what people think it is. I know I've worked in places where when people gave me a description of the community, I asked them, tell me to describe the community as you would to someone who's never lived here before. The description they gave me when I compared it, for example, to secondary data was like, it was like they were in not just two different states, but two different continents or universes. They were totally different. So how people thought of their place was very different from its reality. A situational analysis can also be used to help a group clarify their values as a community. What is important to them? Who are we as a group of people who share a physical place? What do we stand for? What are the things that we value as a community? A situational analysis can also help us to identify some action options and consider the consequences of those action options. Sometimes we want to jump into action without asking the question, what are the costs and what are the benefits? And change has always winners and losers. And I think a key role that we can play with communities, is to ask the questions that encourage the community to think about, if we do X, who's going to be the winners? Who's going to be the losers? What are going to be the costs? And who's going to pay them? And what are going to be the benefits? And who are going to reap those benefits? Some other ways, I think, we can use it to identify potential supporters or opponents of action. And we can identify ways to modify the development proposal to either minimize opposition and increase support. I have been in places where it's clear that a change proposal has created a storm of negative reaction, and it is very clear that there is going to be legal action. Someone is going to sue someone else. And what fascinates me is that when given the opportunity to sit down and talk about what do we agree on and what do we disagree about around this proposal, and how can we increase the number of things we agree on and minimize the things we disagree on, that the pros and cons in the community have so drawn their lines that they are unwilling to sit down at the same table. They would rather spend thousands of dollars and a lot of community energy fighting each other and suing each other rather than sitting down and talking about ways to address the problems. And I think a situational analysis can help communities and community leaders think through these costs and benefits. The situational analysis then is kind of like, can help us kind of see the historic development of the community. I would never argue that history determines who we are, who we will be, but it does help us understand who we are. There are trends in the social, demographic, and economic composition of the community that, if left unchecked, are inevitably going to lead to certain kinds of futures. Communities need to understand that. But they also need to understand that they can reshape those trends and move towards a different future. That situational analysis also helps us understand social, economic, and environmental processes that are operating in our community, as well as the functioning of community systems and the dynamics of how we interact with each other. I think it's also important to point out that the situational analysis can help us understand cultural capital. Tell me, has anyone prior to me talked about the concepts of cultural and social capital in any of these presentations?
We've talked about the community capitals framework very generally. We touched on it a little bit, but we haven't gone into a lot of detail, I don't think.
Okay. Well, let me just kind of point out that communities don't live or don't exist in a vacuum. They are powerfully shaped by their history, by their cultural capital, their historical conditions, their habits, their ways of seeing and acting, the goals and values, sacred symbols, special events that they have. The answer to the question, to me, cultural capital is about how people say the response of, well, we've always done it that way, because it's about how our history has helped to shape who we are and how we see ourselves and how we do things and how we interpret both our past, our current, and our future possibilities. And so it's really important to understand, and for me, a situational analysis needs to tap into the stories that we tell about who we are. A true story is I was working with a community one time. This was our first meeting. It was a community-wide forum. There were 70-some people in the room. And I was facilitating the discussion, and I started off the way I like to start off with was, tell me what you're good at as a community, the things that you feel are very positive, your strengths. And so tell me, tell me what are the positives in this community. And I turned to I used flip charts, and I turned to it and stood there. And I probably waited about 2 minutes, and then finally, this little voice comes up from the background of the room, and the person said, well, we really fight really good among ourselves. I mean, we have some really royal battles. And anybody, why might that be a problem? Can anybody tell me why that might be a problem? Anybody want to comment on why that's not the best thing you could say about, in response to the question, what do you do well as? Mary says she's working in the community. Probably a lot of us have. So these are the stories we tell about ourselves, and a situational analysis helps us, invites people to tell those stories, and by listening, we can kind of get a sense of how people in a place define their essential characteristics and the nature of their past and current and potential future experiences. Social capital is another kind of topic, that a lot of people, it's a hot topic right now, and there's a lot of different definitions of it, but basically it's about trust and social norms. Is this a community where when something goes wrong or someone faces a challenge, everybody comes out to help? Or is this a community that everybody kind of, tends to their own garden and doesn't worry about anybody else? What are the expectations about how business gets done in the community? Do people trust their leadership? Do they trust their local organizations? What are the kinds of social networks that link people together in the community? Are they thin in the sense that there are many social organizations, but the same people are involved or in the leadership positions in all of them? Or are they dense social networks with lots of different people being involved in lots of different kinds of organizations? How are those organizations networked or linked to resources and organizations outside the community? And then the other part of social capital is about the willingness to become engaged in the civic life of the community. Is this a community where if people get talk about things and they say somebody ought to do something about X, that those individuals who said that will get together with other individuals and start working on solving that problem? Or is this a community where there's very low voter turnout? People rarely go to community meetings, certainly hardly ever show up for government meetings, and there's a difficulty getting people to become engaged in community organizations. So situational analysis can help us not only define those characteristics, but also of social capital, but also by looking at cultural capital, help us get a sense of maybe why it is that those types of social capital do or don't exist in that community. So basically the process is to figure out what we're trying to do with it, gather the data, identify information gaps, figure out what else we need to know, collect it, analyze it, create a report, and share it with the community. But obviously it's much more detailed than that. We're going to look at 5 types of situational analysis. An analysis of trends using secondary data, SWOT analysis, key informant interviews, focus groups, and then one I hope you'll find really interesting and fascinating, and that's called a network analysis. So the first one we're going to look at is analysis of secondary trends. And I think probably all of you have done this. Anybody want to comment on an example of where you've done a secondary or an analysis of trends or how you've used it? I just noticed a little conversation that was going on there about people not knowing other ways of communicating other than fighting. And yeah. And it's interesting. Sometimes they don't even realize that they have fallen into that pattern of interaction because it's just become so customary for them. So some examples of analysis of trends. Mary has pointed out using census data to track population trends is a good example of that. Basically, an analysis of trends is just you're using secondary data, something that somebody else has collected, to get a statistical picture of the community. You want to identify what are the trends. You want to describe them. You want to compare what's going on in that community with others in the region, state, or nation. And you want to begin to put an explanation for why what is happening. And I really believe that to do an effective analysis of trends also must provide an explanation of what are the alternatives. If these trends continue, then what? How are they going to affect the community? So to do that, an analysis of trends, you need to think on the focus of your analysis. Are you, just trying to get what do we look like right now, a point in time? Are you interested in change across time? How effective have we been in our economic development programs? How effective have we been in trying to address educational achievement in our community? You can also do an analysis of trends where you do a distribution across space or within categories. So sometimes it's not so much important to figure out what's happening as a community as a whole, but we're more concerned about what's happening in different parts of our community, different neighborhoods, county versus town, different towns within the county or the political geography, political area. Or we might be interested in doing an analysis of trends, thinking about educational attainment and educational achievement in our community. And we ask the question, has there been a significant change in family or household structure that may help us understand the kind of support that kids are getting at home as they work through issues in their schooling? So we might want to look at, distribution across categories between types of households, types of families with children in our community. And then, of course, we might want to compare with what's happening someplace else. To do those kinds of analyses, we really do need to identify the appropriate source. We need to ask, what do we want to know? Why do we want to know it? And how do we need to know it? And, to say, let's do an analysis of trends and do a secondary data analysis, I was like, oh, that's okay. That's easy to do. It's not, because there are many different types of secondary data available, and they offer us different information. I just want to note that there's some community capital framework in several sessions. If you're not familiar with it, you can learn more about it by checking out a link that Heidi posted for us. Thanks, Heidi.
Sure.
Okay, let me just kind of illustrate. These are Kentucky counties, okay? Let's say we're interested in income in our community. It sounds reasonable. How much money do people have? But I'm just going to illustrate here 3 different sources of income, and each of them providing us with a very distinctively different perspective on what's going on in 3 different counties. Are we asking about income of households? Are we asking about incomes of families? Families live in households, but households may also be composed of non-family members. So if we look at median household income for the 2000 census for 3 counties in Kentucky, NERCRD counties in southeastern Kentucky, very community that is classified as persistent poverty county. Oldham County is near Louisville and is one of the richest counties in the state. And then Fayette County is Lexington, where this is coming from. So you see 3 different kind of a broad distribution about median, meaning half above, half below household income. But if I could also go to the census and say, well, I really want to get per capita income. So if we look at that, what we see is that per capita income, the gap, okay, now if we look at per capita, between Oldham County and Fayette County has shrunk considerably. Fayette can still, per capita income is still lower than in Oldham County, but now the gap is less than $2,000 as opposed to almost $30,000. And we can also get secondary data on per capita personal income from what is called the Regional Economic Information Service, and which is also part of the Bureau of Economic Analysis. And here again, it's also per capita personal income, but we get a very different perspective on, the relative ratio or the relative, the ordering of the counties remains the same, but the differences change very dramatically. So what's going on here is this, quite simply. Everybody may talk about, many secondary sources may use the word income or per capita income, but what they count as income is very different. So a cautionary note in secondary data sources and in doing a secondary data analysis or an analysis of trends is to be very clear about what you want to know and how you want to know it, because that determines or is a factor in your choice of secondary data sources. Anybody have questions on that? There is a handout that's available on the longer, I think on the website, that gives you some great sources of secondary data. Let's talk about a SWOT analysis. Any other comments on secondary data, using secondary data? Anybody ever find themselves in a pickle because of the way in which they used it, or they weren't careful about using it? Or created a storm? Let me give you an example from here that happened, got us into some interesting conversations in some communities. We were working with Kids Count, Kentucky, and did a report, this was about 15, 20 years ago, on educational issues related to children and youth in different counties in Kentucky. And if you're familiar with the National Kids Count program, every state has a Kids Count agency that provides data on related to the health, education, and welfare of children and their families. So we were looking at, in this case, education. And we reported both retention rates of county high schools as well as their graduation rates and their dropout rates. And anybody know the difference? Anybody want to kind of speculate on what the difference is between those three words, those three measures of educational performance? Anybody want to talk about that?
Say them again, Lori.
Okay, the three are retention rate, dropout rate, and graduation rate. Three different measures of educational performance. I think that they might be, at a minimum, a retention rate and a graduation rate might be the same, but they aren't. In Kentucky, retention rates are based on the number of students who were in your school, in your program in 9th grade, who graduate in 4 years later. But of course, that's affected by in-migration and out-migration. Graduation rate is the number of students who start their senior year and successfully complete it by graduating. And dropout rate, turns out in Kentucky, the only way you can drop out of school is if you start your academic year and stop going to school during that academic year. But if you complete your academic year in May and just simply don't go back, you didn't drop out because you never started. So all counties were very active in Kentucky pointing out their dropout rate because it was really low. Nobody wanted to talk about retention and graduation rates because those were also low, but they should have been high. And so you can, thinking about understanding the differences in secondary data is really critical. So let me talk about SWOT analysis. Probably everybody's done these. It's a very common method of doing a situational analysis. So it's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. It's one of the most frequently used. It's used to scan both the internal and external environment of a community or an organization. There are tons of websites that are available that give you guidelines for doing it. It's really easy to do. You do it because you want to explore some possibilities. You want to clarify directions and choices that face your community or an organization. You want to think about where change is possible. I mean, is it possible to to change the course that we're on, and if so, how? It is a very effective way. If a community or an organization is in the process of launching a change campaign or a change initiative, a SWOT analysis can help you identify the landscape well enough to develop marketing materials, communications, that are targeted to particular concerns of members of the organization or the community. And, you know, sometimes it's just a really effective way. You've gathered a lot of information about from your situational analysis, the analysis of secondary data. It's really, in effect, a SWOT. Putting it into a SWOT framework is something that people kind of like intuitively understand. I'm not going to go into that anymore because I think we've all done it enough. So let's talk about key informant interviews. Whether you know it or not, all of you have done key informant interviews. This is when you select some particular individuals in a community, and because they have a unique perspective on the issue. And what you do is you have a structured conversation with them. Key informants are persons who are involved with the issue as part of their job or as a volunteer, or key informants are simply knowledgeable about the community, its citizens, and its history. What a key informant interview allows us to do is to see the issue, problem, or situation from an insider's perspective. Key informant interviews are really effective at figuring out what do people think are the important issues or problems. Getting a sense of how people understand or give meaning to the issue or the problem. What people say are the causes or the roots or potential solutions to the issue or the problem. And it can also help, key informant interviews can also help you figure out, are there resources available in this community that can be mobilized? If we could find an action strategy, can we use it? Is there an action strategy that will mobilize local resources? Meaning people will be willing to invest themselves in this opportunity of change. To do this, let me just kind of say, you figure out and be very clear in your mind about what do we need to know from these key individuals. Then in key informant interviews, it's absolutely critical that you do not ask yes/no questions. You must pose what are called open-ended questions. Questions that clearly have no answer, but invite the person to have a conversation. Questions such as, if you were describing what's going on in the community right now to someone, what would you tell them? What do you see as the concerns that people have who are opposed to this project? What do you think are opportunities in this community that we've just not taken advantage of? Those are the kinds of open-ended questions that encourage your key informants to engage you in a conversation based on their expertise and their unique knowledge of what's going on. How do we identify key informants? Well, part of this is you first off, if you know what kind of information you need, then you kind of know who are at least the starting points for your key informant interviews. So if it's something about we want to address issues related to education, both from childhood to adulthood in this community, clearly you would want to talk to some people as key informants who are involved in the local school system. But you would also want to know, is there a community education program here, an adult education program in this community? What does someone with the library or the Historic Society have to say about this? Once you start your key informant interviews, at the end of every single one, you ask a very simple question. Now that you know what we're interested in learning about, who else should we talk to? And that's called a snowball approach. So you use your current people that you've been interviewing to help you identify who else you want to talk to about that topic. What you get then is a lot of conversation, and then you kind of look at it and you say, oh my goodness, how am I going to deal with this? I got pages and pages and pages of comments that people have made. So how do you evaluate that? What you do is you look for key phrases. You look for commonalities as well as the differences in what got discussed. And you also step back and ask yourself, what didn't people talk about when we asked them about this issue? What's not talked about is often as important as what does get discussed. The informant interviews, let me give you an example of some ways in which they've been used in our state. They help me to understand different views on a proposed land use change. How are people looking at that proposal? To convert a farm, for example, to a residential subdivision. To take an industrial land that's been designated for industrial development and put a waste management site there. To put to convert land from one use to another. So the kinds of questions I wanted to know what people who supported that proposal were saying and what people who were opposed to it were saying. So the kinds of questions I asked were, what are your hopes for what will happen if this proposed change occurs? What are your fears if the land use change doesn't happen? And can you tell me who I should talk to if I wanted to learn more about the views of those like you who favor this proposal? And then you flip it for those who are opposed to it. It provides a way to help me understand what people are thinking and where they stand. It helps you to flesh out the key issues, the key perspectives, related to a problem or an issue or a debate or a conflict within the community. So I'm going to pause here because I want to ask, who's used key informant interviews, whether you use that name or not, to do some of their work? Patrick, tell me what you've done in North Carolina, or just because I'll read it for people. You call them situation assessments. Very good. Well, usually around watershed questions. Okay, thank you. Very good. I guess in that situation, you're thinking about ways in which people interact with their environment that might affect watershed quality. Yeah. Patrick says it begins with a water quality problem, but everything comes up. Absolutely. It's really a conflict assessment. Absolutely, absolutely. That isn't, thank you for saying that. Because key informant interviews help us really get to some of the underlying issues in a community. We all have worked in places where there's like coming in as outsiders. I mean, I see this like giant elephant in the room, but everybody's careful to walk around it because they don't want to address it. Key informant interviews can help us to understand that, as well as what you're calling the situation assessment becoming a conflict assessment. Great job, Patrick. Thank you. Someone else? Anybody else? These key informant interviews. Heidi's pointing out that she hasn't done them formally, but they're the kind of conversations that are critical to getting your bearings in a community development initiative. Absolutely. I've made it sound formal, but they really aren't. These are, I call them structured conversations. Don points out that they're using it both to learn about and inform people of broadband assets throughout a region. Thank you for saying that, because you're correct. Different types of situational analyses can be used to both gather and disperse information. So you can structure the interview so that you make a statement about fact to the person you're interviewing and getting from them an assessment of how others in the community or organization would respond to that statement of fact, or what do they know about it. Great job. Thanks, Don. Thanks for doing that. Anybody else? Let me just say one kind of cautionary note here. If you're using key informant interviews to really try and do a situational analysis where you get a comprehensive look at the community and an understanding of the community issues, you need to be very systematic in who you talk to. You need to be sure that you aren't just focusing on one side or one set of interests or one perspective or one geographic area and not others. You need to systematically think through who are the key informants, reflecting the diversity of the community. Michelle and Brian said that they are just talking about how important it is to find a person that can be objective to conduct these types of interviews. You're right, that is a challenge. But I honestly believe that oftentimes that's exactly how people define extension, and especially their county extension agents, as being the neutrals in the community. Maybe I'm wrong, but I see that a lot here in Kentucky. Talk a little bit about focus groups. Again, you've done this whether you realize it or not. I don't think you could have been any of you have an extension council, you've done a focus group. And yeah, Patrick and Michelle are just commenting that being extension does get you into the door to have some of these conversations with these key informants. So focus groups, gosh, they're an old technique, actually developed by the military in the 1930s and 40s. But a focus group is a semi-structured interview with small groups of people. The idea is that, a key informant interview is one-on-one. With a focus group, I'm having a conversation between me as a facilitator. What I'm doing is, as a facilitator, I am facilitating a discussion by another group of persons around a set of questions that I want them to answer. So I'm facilitating their conversation. And the idea is that, and I think we've all seen this, we'll be in a meeting, and we'll be having a conversation, and we seem to be stuck on something. Or we keep going over the same thing over and over again, and finally someone in the group says something different, or says, maybe we ought to talk about it this way, or maybe we hadn't thought about this. And that sparks others in the group to say, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Oh yeah, maybe we could do that. So the idea of focus group is that in having a group conversation, we build off the ideas and insights of other members of the group to create a more powerful and in-depth discussion of the issue, or to provide opportunity for more creative discussion. Each person then can react, contrast, or build on what other people have said. And so they are very useful when we're really trying to be involved in creative group thinking. And like I said, you've probably all done this without realizing it, but maybe your Extension Advisory Council has been trying to address ways to fund or an expansion of your facility, or to start up a new program. And you kind of do like a brainstorming session about how can we think out of the box, how can we do this differently than we've done in the past. When there's a really complex issue or problem on the table, a focus group can be very useful because it allows us to hear the perspectives of others and to come to a better understanding of how people are thinking about the topic or the issue. Focus groups can also be good at, depending on how you organize these, to get the viewpoints of different groups. So if there is as Patrick was saying, that the conflict assessment, in terms of you start off with a watershed analysis and situational analysis, and then you end up into something else that's really a deep rising or deep persistent problem in the community or conflict. You can use a focus group to try and understand how the different parties to the conflict define what's going on. From their perspective, what is point of conflict? From their perspective, how have the other parties been acting with respect to the conflict? And from their perspective, what might be some potential solution? And how would they explain the value of their potential solution? Well, focus groups can really help us think through things, and depending on how you structure them, we finally note it can really help a community or a group weigh potential costs and benefits and impacts of different strategies for action. And you do that by structuring your focus group to think about an option or an action strategy from different perspectives. So you do it, how you do it, you figure out what, you think about what you want to have come as an outcome from it. What do we need to know in our situational analysis from this focus group? You need to figure out who's going to be there, who are you going to invite. Is only one focus group possible, or do we need to have several of them? Does each focus group need to be comprised of persons who are all alike in terms of ideas or backgrounds or position on the issue, or do we want to have a mix of persons? We need to identify a facilitator or train local facilitators. Imagine that. Conduct it, record the discussion, and then interpret it. Is it possible? I'm going to pose this to you guys. Is it possible to train someone, a local person, to facilitate a community discussion? Is it possible to train someone to facilitate a community discussion?
Lori, just for clarification, do you mean someone within the community?
Yes, exactly. Patrick says it would have to be an incredibly special person who everyone already trusts. Okay? And that person has to be someone people feel has no one view. Patrick, you're right. If you're talking about training local facilitators to do a broad range of focus groups, let me give you an option. Let me give you a different way of thinking about it. For about 20 years, I've been using a community visioning process that uses focus groups. I do train local residents to facilitate a focus group discussion, but they are going back and doing it in their own civic organization or their church or with their school group or in their own neighborhood. So what we do is when we're doing this process, we train them, we ask community groups who want to participate in the visioning process, and they're all encouraged to do this, and well, strongly encouraged. And most of them want to. But we ask them to identify someone who is willing to lead a group discussion back with them on the topic, future of the community. And then we also invite in anyone else who's interested in serving as a facilitator to attend a training. Part of this is about, you're right, it can't be someone who's polarizing in their group. But again, when we do the visioning process, we are training local persons to go back to their local group. So someone from the chamber says, I'm willing to go do that training and come back and lead a discussion. Or someone from the library board says, I want to go to that training and I'll come back and lead a discussion. Or someone in a geographic area of the community says, I think people in our part of the county need, or our part of the community need to be able to talk about these issues. I'm going to go learn how to be a facilitator, and I'm going back to my neighborhood or my area or my fire district, and I'll lead a discussion among us. So what it does then is that issue of polarizing or who am I, do I trust you? Because you are of the group, they tend to be more trusted, and they are comfortable working with that group.
Lori, just a question or comment. I mean, in here you're talking specifically about a community visioning process. So some of the comments that Michelle and Brian are making, and I think Patrick was saying, if it was more of an issue of conflict, then that would really be, you'd have different needs there and probably look to an outside facilitator than someone obviously connected to either one or the other groups that are opposed to one another.
I agree, but I still think it could work in the sense that if it's a conflict issue and there are two groups going head to head, I think a beginning spot might be to ask each one of those groups to send someone to be trained to be a facilitator for them.
Great, that's a good idea.
Go back to them and guide them through a discussion.
Good point.
Okay, and go ahead.
No, just thank you. Good point.
And then Michelle and Brian are asking, how do you get initial buy-in to bring these different groups or interests to the facilitator table? The process that I've been using, there is a local group that volunteers to lead the whole visioning process. And I suggest that be composed of persons who represent various interests in the community. And I tell them that it's their responsibility to use their network of connections to convince the different folks social organizations in the community to participate in the visioning process. And that's, and typically, you know, how should I say this? A lot of times we read about local government wants to hear from you. Come to a meeting at the courthouse on Tuesday at 7 p.m. Sit in those uncomfortable chairs, surrounded by people you don't know, to talk about something. I think the thing that compels this process is it's part of one of their monthly meetings. The chamber meets every month. What we're asking them to do is to donate one of those meetings, about an hour to an hour and 20 minutes of meeting time, to this discussion about the future of the community. So the people who are participating, they're already, you know, they're already at that place. They're not having to get up and go out and do it. They are, you know, we're already there. My sense is that oftentimes in communities, civic organizations are always looking for a topic for a monthly meeting. And so, oh yeah, that's a good one. We don't have to worry about filling in the March meeting now because we're going to do this discussion. Why do particular individuals do it? There are some that arise just because this is the kind of thing they like doing. But they, others do it because they want to learn something new. Generally, when we do this, I train between 35 and 75 people in the community to be facilitators. And they all get at least one facilitation under their belt. That's with the group that they're from. And then you got a pool of 35 to 70 some people in your community who have been gone through a training and have actually done it once. And you know, that's a nice pool of talent to build for your community. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm gonna come back because Patrick's been asking a couple of questions, and some of these I think are important. The larger process, the overall process, okay, of putting the whole visioning process together, I don't get paid for that, okay? In the sense of separate payment. In the past, we have always done that. I've always done this as part of my extension outreach program. If there are any costs to the project, the community is expected to pay that. I think we are moving to a place where we're going to have to institute a small fee for this service that I do, but as you know, but you're right. As extension, we're getting paid. We're already getting paid. You know, you're correct, and that's how we've always thought about it. What I see myself as, in terms of like a community visioning process, is I facilitate the big process. But the local community people, representatives, what I call the coordinating committee, they have to facilitate everything else. I can't do their marketing. I can't do their advertising. I can't do the setting up of places and times and the contacting of groups to get people to come and be volunteer facilitators. They've got to do that. And that's pretty much, I tell them I can I can set up a process and guide them through it, but the doing part of it has to be there. And from my perspective, that's really important. So in any case, we got these focus groups. We got the community volunteers, and we're training them as facilitators. I go through a basic facilitator training. You know, what is facilitation? What are the key characteristics of a good facilitator? I give them a method of facilitating that kind of makes it easier for them to manage their group. And we've developed over the, we've been doing, like I said, 20-some years, a set of questions that really seem to work in terms of generating a lot of conversation and a remarkable level of consistency in responses. regardless of whether the discussion was being held by the chamber, a humane society, or a church group, or an educational group, there's a lot of consensus that comes out. And you have in front of you the 4 questions that I've been using over these years. Comments? Questions? Any other comments or questions about this? So I've taken a focus group process and adapted it to use in a situational analysis as part of a community visioning process, which is a step towards a community strategic plan. In the places where I've done this, we've had as few as 200 people participate in a community of about 9,000. And I've had as many as 2,500 participate in a community of 12,000. Generally, we generally get between 500 to 700 to 1,000 participants. And when you think about it, what else? You might get more in a survey, but you wouldn't get, this would be a hard set of 4 questions to ask in a survey. So it's been, like I said, it's been pretty effective for us. Now let's talk about a network analysis. Okay, this is a social science technique, and again, I've worked on it and tried to adapt it to something that we can do in extension. So social networks are the web of social relationships that link us as individuals through organizations. And okay, let's face it. If you think about the 3 leading organizations in your community, and who are the board members, how much overlap is there? If you're a rural community, it's going to be a lot. What you're doing with a social network analysis or network analysis is you're looking to identify those relationships that link or connect decision-making, power, and authority in the community. But what you can do with the network analysis is there's techniques now where you can actually chart these, and I'll show you an example of it. So you can get a visual presentation of these relationships at both the individual and the organizational level. And you can also kind of graph this or draw it in such a way that you also figure out which individuals and which organizations are connected to groups and resources outside the community. And, as a sociologist, we call those local influentials with extra-local networks. Who knows who? And this is the starter one, but I got a more complex one I'll show you. It's kind of neat. So the network analysis allows us to see the social relationships, how people are connected in the community. And that allows us to think about and perhaps understand how these social connections make our decisions interdependent, and how we use our social relationships to influence a real wide range of things that happen in our organizations and our communities. So let me give you a simple example of how to do a network analysis. And let me illustrate what, then I'll give you an example of how it's been done. So let's say you want to do an analysis of arts opportunities in my community. The opportunities for cultural activities, performing, other types of arts in the community. What kind of basis is there? And let's say you have a local arts organization, okay? What you do is you begin by identifying who are the board members, and then you ask them for an opportunity to have a conversation with them. And you interview them around these types of questions, although you can kind of think about, you can build your own too. What other organizations do you belong to? What leadership positions do you hold? Who else holds a leadership position in those or in this and other organizations that you belong to? If you want to get information about a topic, about hosting or bringing in, whether there'd be support in the community to bring in a big name act to the community for benefit performance, who would you talk to? Who do you seek advice from around this topic? If you wanted to make that benefit concert happen, who would you contact first? And then do you belong to or serve on regional or state boards of any kind of arts-related organization? And then literally, you could chart the relationships, okay? And let me illustrate this, how someone, I've used this, I use this method, I've introduced this method to graduate students in our master's degree program, many of whom are county extension agents. And one of them was a new agent. He'd been in extension for a while, but he was new to the county. And what he did was he used this method to identify the leadership structure in his community related to ag. He began with the members of the Ag Advisory Council and then branched out from there asking these questions. If you wanted to learn about how farmers in this area are thinking about an issue, who would you talk to? If you wanted to be sure that farmers in this area learned about a new service or program, how would you do this? Who would you talk to? If you wanted to get farmers in the community to participate in a new program, how would you go about doing it? Who would you contact first? Who would you say is someone that farmers in this community look up to? And who do farmers in this community ask for advice? He talked to, over the course of a couple of weeks, about 25 people altogether, building out from his Ag Advisory Council. And what he discovered was that there was, whether these people were on the Ag Advisory Council, they belonged to the Kentucky Beef Council or the Beef Network or any other kind of local farm-related organization, there was one person that everybody said came up in every single conversation. If you want to get things done, this is who you go to. If you want to know what's going on, this is who you go to. And interestingly, that gentleman was not a board member of any of these organizations. But as that agent said in writing up his his findings about this, he said, what I discovered is that if I really want something to happen in this community, I have to look outside my organization and find the person who's the pivot point in the community. And you can, and let me just say, I'm going to show you how you can chart some of this. Okay? This is how you can visualize a network, right? And so in this particular example, this is the A network up here, and this is the B network, and they are linked together by persons 13 and 32. So what happens if either one of them leaves or gets sick? How would these two social networks stay in touch with each other? How would they know what's going on in the other location? How could they avoid having conflict around an issue without those key people connecting them? And my agent who did this project with his in his community, in his new community, there are software programs that you can do that will let you do this. But I don't have a favorite software networking program. I think there's just so many of them. But I'll be honest with you, most of the people that I know that are using this, they use colored pencils on paper. And they just make circles, and the circles, and they color the circles in depending on the type of connection that they have. And it's not rocket science then. You just start saying who's connected to whom. But it's what you really see when you start doing something like this, you really start seeing how not only are these networks connected, but you also see how information flows within the network. B is very linear. I could be in many different positions in that network and find out what's going on. That's not true if I'm in network B. So I think, to me, network analysis is like this really great way, especially if we're coming new into a community, or we're already in the community, but we're going to be addressing a new issue, figuring out who knows whom and who talks to whom and who's related to whom on this topic can be really, really useful. So to me, I think it's a really cool way of thinking about and doing a situational analysis of the community. Oh, network science, yeah. Like I said, I am not very technical, and I've read some of the stuff on social networking analysis. I read enough to be dangerous with it, so I can figure out how I can use it and how I can explain it to people in a way that makes it understandable to them. But I think it really is a powerful tool for situational analysis. So summary. Situational analysis can allow us to define our assets and our resources. It can help us identify our cultural and social capital. I'm a firm believer that if I say who is going to do X and nobody in the community says I will or my group will, that we just toss that idea out and we don't go back to it. Because if they ain't willing to do it, then why should we waste time on it? It allows us to locate community influentials, not only the people in the formal positions, but those people who are movers and shakers that are back there, but don't necessarily hold an official position. And they have power based on their ability to network and bring people together or keep people apart, or keep groups apart. And it allows us to identify the networks that link people with organizations and organizations with institutions, both inside and outside the community. And I really think a situational analysis, these techniques can help us provide a context for discussing difficult public issues and for making public choices. To me, if you don't start with a situational analysis, then you're jumping into the middle of it, and you may find yourself in trouble. So I see a situational analysis at the beginning point for all community development efforts. And I love quotes, but I think both of these really get to the heart of this. That for me, what the situational analysis does is it gives us enough information to change our level of thinking, so that we take a step back and out of the context to try and understand what's going on. Not from my perspective as an outsider, but from the perspective of those inside the problem. But also understanding that as an outsider, my perspective is important also. And then I really think that situational analysis is the foundation for conflict resolution by getting people to state the problem in a way that will allow a solution. So I think it's really a powerful kind of method that allows us to do important things. So there's a bunch of links there for you on the handout, and that's it. Comments or suggestions or questions?
Thank you very much, Lori. That was great. Can you come to Vermont and do some of these for us?
yeah, I would. I mean, you know, the thing is that it doesn't, I'm not a brain scientist, you know? Anybody can do this, really, really. Anybody can. Okay.
Yeah.
We did have one.
It's a matter of carving out the time, I think.
We did have.
Yeah, but let me kind of say, okay. Patrick asked, any ways to deal with all the data? You know, it's possible to deal with all the data. I mean, look at when you're kind of, you can I can train, and I have trained graduate students and undergraduate students to read through lists of statements and responses in a focus group, and to identify common themes and key concepts. I do want you to know, though, that there are software programs that are word-based that will do that for you if you've got them all typed. Okay. And so yes, there are software programs. I'd have to get you the exact name of it, and I know it'll come to me. If not, I'll email it out, because there is possibilities of software programs. So they will, in fact. Oh, here Cheryl says it's in vivo to help code. Okay, great, thanks, Cheryl. But I think you're right, Cheryl. I'm kind of like a hand-on person. I just kind of do it myself, you know, just the manual coding works just as well. Actually, I'm having all of my undergraduate students, I teach a research methods class in community leadership development, and all of my students are doing a secondary data analysis this semester. And so if I could teach undergraduates that, we can teach our community partners to do it. And I truly believe that if they do some of this work, they need to do this work as much as possible themselves, because then it becomes real. And they're the actors, not the passive recipients.
Lori, this is Don.
Yes.
In your network analysis, in the example that you gave, the relationship from person A to person B is really bidirectional. In other words, person A to person B and then B back to A.
Yes.
Is there anything that you've seen that measures that strength of that relationship?
Yeah, there actually is software that does that. I just don't use it, okay? Because you got to understand, Lori is like a 19th century kind of person. Somehow trapped in a 21st century world. But yes, there are softwares that measure the strength, the duration, the density of relationships. There's some really cool stuff that's out there that allows you to do that. But I just find that for most of the people that I work with, that's like way beyond them. All they need to know is, who do I need to talk to?
Right. Well, we've run into that.
Key person.
Well, we've run into that same issue, but the thing is that there's a lot of people look to one particular individual or a small group of individuals. When you talk to those folks, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot flowing back in the other direction. That's the interesting thing. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you're right. And that's because, remember, sometimes those influential. Right?
That's exactly what it is.
Power over information.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Wonderful
Do it.
talk.
Okay,
Thank you.
great.
Any other final questions or comments? If not, before we turn you loose on Friday afternoon, just a reminder that please help us out with the evaluations for sessions. Getting great response rates, so we'll have to ramp up the nagging, I think.
Tell them that they cannot get certification or recognition for having participated in this unless they do.
And so, everybody, we'll see you next week. Lori,
Hey, you gotta
thank
teach
so
more,
much.
you know, you gotta teach undergraduates more. So that's work.
Oh, well, I did that, been there, done that.
Thank you all very much.
Thank
Great.
you, Lori.
Thanks, Lori. Mm-hmm. Any final comments, Heidi?
I don't think so. Just a reminder that next week we're focusing on community development approaches, and that's with Bo Ballou of the Southern Regional Rural Development Center. And, you know, I've been going through, I'll just mention Moodle again, and I realize I say that quite a bit, but I've just been going through and after having read everybody's introductory stuff, now finally going back and responding to them. And again, you guys just have a great wealth of resources and experiences. So I just encourage you to share them with one another. So that's all I have to say today, except have a great weekend.
Great. Have a lovely
Thank you all.
weekend. Stay warm, stay dry.
Mm-hmm. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Okay, I'm closing out the conference call and then the session.
Thank you.